Hi everyone, I'm Dr. Susan Brown, Director of the Center for Better Bones and Alkaline for Life. It is my immense pleasure to welcome each and every one of you to this masterclass on omega-3 fats. You know, we know a lot about vitamins and minerals. We know about protein and even the phytonutrients like quercetin and curcumin, but we don't pay much attention to the essential fats. Today we're going to dive deep into this question of essential fats, particularly looking at the fish oil essential fats. Essential fats are really important. They form a great part of the cell membrane right around every single cell. They direct what goes into the cell and what comes out of the cell. They conduct cell signaling, how the signals get into the cells and the communication. They're powerful anti-inflammatory and antioxidant substances, and these omega-3 fats even regulate gene functioning. So we're going to learn a lot about omega-3 fats. I personally started using omega-3 fats decades ago when I realized that they could help with bone health by their terrific anti-inflammatory action. Then I started to realize, look at the research, see that they really added to brain functioning as we aged, a reduction in Alzheimer, a reduction in dementia. I thought that's really great for me. And heart health. My family has a little history of heart health. In this webinar, you're going to learn a lot about the vast research on heart health and omega-3 fats. And finally, longevity. I got interested in longevity. There's a lot I want to do in this life, and I want to be as strong and as mentally acute and as healthy for as long as possible. Actually, I've been taking omega-3 fats for years, and I was able to measure my omega-3 fat with this simple at-home blood spot test. This test was developed by our masterclass instructor, Dr. Bill Harris, who has written 300 articles on omega-3 fats. And he is considered amongst the top 2% of scientists around the world by the influence he has had. Dr. Harris has spent 40 years studying omega-3 fats and, as I say, written 300 articles and influenced many thousands of researchers all over the world. Dr. Harris is a professor at the Sanford School of Medicine, the University of South Dakota, and he also directs the Fatty Acid Research Institute. He's been really kind enough to spend 1 hour with us answering all of my questions about omega-3 fats. So you're going to be able to hear his answers. We cover 19 topics, everything from heart health, cardiovascular health, brain health, what difference omega-3 fats might make, longevity, one of my most fascinating topics, to issues of pregnancy and childhood, how important it is for little children, both in utero, before they're even little children, before they're born, and as young children, for brain development, for eye development, why we need these omega-3 fats, for issues of immunity, for issues of cancer, even exercise performance. We're going to study 19 topics. So don't worry if you don't capture everything. Dr. Harris is a scientist, and he's going to talk in somewhat scientific terms. And you're going to get to understand 19 different topics. Don't worry, because we're going to make this webinar available. You can come look at it again. And most importantly, we'll have a question and answer period after this masterclass. So try to stay tuned, jot down your questions, and I will try to answer your questions after this masterclass. So what I want to tell you is that the omega-3 fats are a story worth telling and a topic worth understanding. Let's get started. So once again, thanks for taking your time. You're a really busy professor, but we really appreciate your time.
Oh, I'm happy to do it, Susan. This is going to be fun.
Yeah, let's rock on. So let's start right out. You have 300 articles. You certainly a vast variety of information. A lot of it focused on heart health. And as I understand, you began your early studies. You kind of were involved in that work that looked at that found out that triglycerides, high triglycerides, could be lowered by omega-3 fats. Is that kind of, you started with omega-3 fats and lipids? Is that how?
Right. That was the idea. And as I got my PhD in nutrition, then I went into postdoc with a physician researcher in Portland, Oregon, Bill Connor, who was very interested in the effects of dietary fats on cholesterol levels in those days. late 70s.
Yeah.
And yeah, one of my first assignments was he wondered. We all knew that saturated fats from animal products, hard fats, solid fats would raise cholesterol levels, and we all knew that vegetable oils or liquid fats would lower cholesterol levels, but we really didn't know why.
Yeah.
And we didn't know if it was the fact, the physical property, the solidness, the liquidness, or the fact that it came from an animal versus came from a plant. What was doing this? So Bill had this idea, Bill Connor. Well, let's look at fish oils, because fish are animals, but the oil from them is liquid.
Right.
So let's see what they do. And turns out that they lowered cholesterol just like a vegetable oil did. But more importantly, actually, it turned out in the long run, they do not lower cholesterol.
Yes. Right.
What lowered cholesterol in our early studies was the fact that we took away the saturated fats to replace them with the long chain omega-3s. And just it's the taking away of the saturated fats that lowered the cholesterol. It really wasn't an active action of these. Because certainly in later years, we found when you just give fish oils and you're not switching out diets, fish oils don't lower cholesterol. But so they do lower triglycerides, which is the other lipid.
So that was kind of incidental. I mean, that is incidental how you got into the omega-3 fats. And also that kind of important discovery that sort of kicked off omega-3 fats was that it lowered triglycerides. And that certainly made that made the books. You made JAMA with the Journal of American Medical Association with that publication, I understand.
We had one in that area. Yeah. And we also had, I think the other thing that was driving the field early was the original hypothesis from Dyerberg and Bang, the researchers from Denmark, that the omega-3s were anti-thrombotic. They were preventing blood clots, particularly EPA. And so we got very interested in platelet function too, as well as lipids, and that we did early studies on both of those fields.
Just tell us a little bit so a person could understand why the importance of omega-3 fats. How are they important to the physiology?
Well, I guess the first thing maybe is what are they? Because as nutritionists, we both are, people get confused about this.
Right.
There's fats and oils, and fats and oils are the things we eat. Oils are just liquid fats at room temperature. And typical fats like butter, shortening, lard, those are fats, but they're solid at room temperature. But it's physical properties there. The omega-3 fatty acids are a subset of those liquid oils. And they don't come from plants. Typically, they come from fish oils. We're all very familiar with vegetable oils, canola oils, those things. Those are plant oils, plant seed oils, actually. But fish oils are obviously from fish, and they are liquid at room temperature, and they have a particular, really every fat's physical property is determined by its chemical structure.
Sure. And
so we have two different kinds of what we call polyunsaturated fatty acids. So really the omega-6 and the omega-3 family, those are all liquid fats. The omega-6 fatty acids are typically from plant oils, and the big omega-3s are from fish oils. And they're, we'll get into the properties later, what they do for your health, but basically we don't eat much omega-3 in the West. But we eat plenty of the omega-6 in the West.
That's what we understand.
That's not our problem.
Like there's an imbalance between these essential fats. A lot of omega-6s we consume, not very many omega-3s. And the omega-3s play a role in every single cell membrane, every membrane of the...
Well, they're certainly incorporated in the membrane, and they have influenced the properties of membranes. And membranes are not just envelopes covering the outside of a cell, playing no role in the metabolism. They're very important, very integrally important to the function of the cell and what the cell will let in, what the cell will let out. how the cell responds to inflammatory signals or oxidation. Omega-3s change the membrane properties in really special ways for all the cells in the body.
And I understand they also keep the membrane flexible. And to keep the cell
right,
flexible.
right. Yeah, there's a flexibility, a ability to bend when it needs to, because we know there are lots of proteins or receptors that are going through membranes that just sit in the middle of the membrane. And if the membrane is fluid, then that protein or that enzyme can work right. If the membrane is tight and inflexible, then those receptors and transmembrane proteins are all stiffened up. They can't do their job very well.
So omega-3 fats and are essential fats. I think I saw some research that like 90% of Americans, or at least 70-80%, are deficient in omega-3 fats. Do you
well, right. If we define deficient by having omega-3 index levels, so we'll talk a little more about the omega-3 index, but it's the amount of EPA and DHA, which are the two omega-3s we get from fish primarily.
Yes, and
how much of those are in a red blood cell membrane, and we like to see that level over 8%. So if you're under 8%, certainly 95% of Americans are under 8%.
And you bring up a really good point that how we define deficiency can be quite variable. You might have, you might have some agencies saying, well, if it doesn't cause disease, anything that it causes a disease because you lack it, that's deficiency. But we like to look at optimum health, the level for optimum health. And I think what you've done with the omega-3 fats is look at populations that do extremely well, like the Japanese population, and look at their omega-3 fat levels. Right. And then say, let's see if there's some way that how we could approximate that. Is that correct in saying that?
I think that's the Japanese are kind of the poster child for a high omega-3 being associated with good health outcomes. I mean, obviously Japanese don't live forever. They get diseases, they have other problems. But because their fish intake is so high culturally, and again, for virtually all of life, even in utero. I mean,
right, exactly.
Japanese folks are being bathed with high, good levels of omega-3, and it plays out in the long run. They live about 4 or 4.5 years longer than Americans do on average. And we can't really say it's, I hate to say,
yes,
we can't pin it to omega-3 because there's a lot of things different, but that's one thing that's different.
What would be some of the highlights of some of the benefits of the omega-3 fats for the cardiac and for the vascular system?
Yeah, if we look at the cardiovascular system, generally, then we're talking about the heart and the blood vessels.
Right.
And we'll start with the blood vessels. That's a little bit simpler because we know the omega-3, having high omega-3 levels will help the blood vessels to be more, like we were talking about cells, membranes being fluid, makes the blood vessels less likely to be stiff. It makes them a little bit looser, and keeps them younger in a way because things get older. As they get older, they get stiffened up.
Just like the cell membrane is more fluid and flexible, the vessels are.
The vessels are right, and so a higher omega-3 is associated with lower blood pressure, and we've shown that lower blood pressure comes from taking pretty high doses of omega-3, and not just eating fish, but from taking omega-3 supplements. So the blood pressure is an important feature. The other thing is, now we move back to the heart itself, which is pumping the blood through the blood vessels. There's a lot of things that omega-3s do. One thing, they actually slow down. Having a high omega-3 slows down the heart rate a little bit. So just the rate at which it beats, it may be 1 or 2 beats per minute slower, which is good. I mean, obviously to a point. You don't want to go too far in that.
Was that the Cooper Institute study where they exercised people and found that they had omega-3 fats, they could recover more quickly to a normal heart rate that might have been a couple beats lower than the
right. That study we did with the Cooper Clinic, we did look at omega-3 levels in several thousand patients that had gone through the Cooper Clinic in Dallas. And we did find that, and everybody that goes there gets a exercise test, stress test. And part of that is, walking on a treadmill and getting your heart rate up as high as you can. And then as soon as you stop exercising, naturally your heart rate's going to start going down. The healthier your heart is, the faster the rate goes back toward normal. And so we found that people that have the higher omega-3 levels, their heart rate after exercise dropped faster toward normal than other people who it just kept going, it kept going at a high rate even after it stopped exercise, which is not healthy. So
and that has to do with the autonomic tone.
It's certainly partly controlled by the autonomic nervous system, the balance between the sympathetic part that's driving it and the parasympathetic, which is slowing it down.
Yeah.
And that balance is it's also probably just the sensing of the heart cells of how much oxygen they've got. And their response, again, this is all through membranes. They're sensing the oxygen levels, and they can actually, the heart is more efficient with its use of oxygen when there's high omega-3 levels there.
Okay.
It's very complicated. It's above my pay grade to explain that exactly how the heart does this, but we know it does. Plus, the other sides of it are, again, low omega-3s, lower triglyceride levels. And those are fats that contribute toward ultimately a building up of plaque in the arteries and the whole atherosclerosis side of things. Mm-hmm. And they also, the omega-3s will, as Bang and Dyerberg figured out with the Eskimos, they will make the blood a little bit thinner. Well, that's the colloquial way of saying it. Less likely to clot.
Less likely to clot.
Inappropriately. Right,
About similar, you said, to a baby aspirin or to an aspirin, or how?
Something like that. Yeah. If you look at the effects on what's called the bleeding time, mm-hmm. Old-fashioned test where they actually cut your skin and just measure how long it takes you to stop bleeding. It does about the same as aspirin, but it does a lot of other stuff too, along affecting the way the blood platelets clot.
Yes, exactly. To make the whole body, isn't it interesting? We do yoga because we want to be flexible. This is like a flexibility for the cells. We get the brain membrane cell flexible. We get the arteries flexible. We get the heart able to adjust to different situations, to recover more quickly. The anti-inflammatory effect also has to be very important, since heart disease is largely inflammatory.
Yeah, right. That's more and more the focus of so many disease states.
Right.
A chronic, mild hyperinflammation that just goes on and on. It just builds up over time. And the omega-3s, I think that's one of their strong parts. They dampen down that inflammatory reaction and keep you in a less inflammatory state. And not, again, this is the line between subclinical and clinical disease and all this sort of thing, because you can't really measure a really hyper-inflamed person because of the blood tests aren't very good. But we do know that higher omega-3 is linked in many, many studies with lower inflammatory burden.
And it's interesting because with bone health, for years we do a very complete program for bone. What I talk about, the 20 key bone nutrients, and of course, omega-3 fats are amongst those. And my research leads me to recommend 3,000 milligrams of omega-3 fats. That's where I see the breaking point that makes a difference with bone health. And that's why it's really interesting. When I did your little omega-3 test, I came out with a score of 10. And
I had a girl.
Yeah. 10 is really great, right? It's
it's very good.
And so
Japanese,
but one of my assistants, she came up with a 4. Now 4 is more like typical, right, of Americans.
4 to 5, yeah.
So we find that 3,000 is a very good amount for bone health. So it is comforting to me to know that it's very likely my people doing 3,000 are going to come up with a nice omega-3 index that's going to help their heart, their longevity, even their emotional things. But let's go back to heart for a second, though. So some of these many studies on cardiovascular disease showing where they have actually measured omega-3 levels, and to see the variation in reduction of, for example, these fatal heart attacks, or the reduction in mortality from heart disease. Can you Can you talk to a little bit about that? About those?
Yeah, I think the earliest, well, the whole story started as you mentioned, in studies in Greenland with Danish investigators in the 1970s, discovering omega-3 fatty acids essentially in the diets and blood of these Eskimos. And these folks were also having very few acute myocardial infarctions, fatal heart attacks. And so they're sort of tied, couldn't tell if it was causal, but there was that relationship there. And then studies came out, a few studies started looking at fish intake in populations and rates of heart disease, and found, oh, it's not just Eskimos, I mean, even in just Westerners, higher fish intake was associated with lower risk for heart attacks and fatal heart attacks. And then finally, a randomized trial was done in the late 1980s, where they gave randomized heart attack victims to a high fish diet or not, and found that the people who had the high fish diet were much less likely to have a second heart attack.
I see.
But that's fish. That's not just, fish is not just big omega-3 capsule, right? There's a lot more going on there. So it took another 10 years until we had the first direct study where they just gave fish oil capsules to people, not recommending fish, gave fish oil capsules to patients with heart disease, and followed them for several years, and found that the ones that had omega-3 were lower rate of sudden cardiac death, lower rate of total mortality. And that was the GISI, we call the GISI Prevention study. It was an Italian study. And that was the one late 1999, 2000, when that was published. And that really jump-started a lot of trials in this area. And since that time, there have been many trials of omega-3 in heart patients to try to replicate, reproduce that study. And it's been mixed results. They don't always work. In fact, in the last 15 years, probably more studies have not lowered heart disease rates than have, with a few exceptions. And there are reasons for that. And a good part of it is the increasing omega-3 intake in the population in general. So the control group is not so deficient in omega-3 as they used to be.
I see.
Second thing is we have much better cardiac care over the last 20 years. So people are not having, number one, prevention. We're actually reducing risk factors for heart disease, less smoking, less lipid levels are down. So risk is not as high. And when people have a heart attack, they get to the hospital fast, and they get what they call revascularized. In other words, they get the blood flowing again very quickly. So the damage to the heart is not as much as it used to be. And so the people who have heart attacks now are not as much risk. So there's a variety of reasons why giving the same old dose of omega-3 for 3 or 4 years is not changing heart disease rates anymore, because we're better at caring for it. It doesn't mean omega-3s are not good for the heart. It just means that using them like a medicine.
Yes, exactly.
And starting when you're 65 years old and you're trying to prevent a heart attack by age 70, which is kind of the way these trials work.
Yes.
This isn't going to work. But that's a different question than if you have a high omega-3 level for 50, 60 years, are you ever going to have that heart attack?
Right.
And so the nutritional approach versus I guess you'd say pharmacologic approach are very different. Right. That's why we like the omega-3 index, because you can tell your status and you can keep your status up high for decades and decades and decades, and reduce your risk for a variety of things, which I'm sure we'll talk about.
So one of the important things it's right, nutrients are rarely used as drugs. I mean, there's going to be one nutrient for one effect, but the fact that if you have adequate level of these nutrients lifelong, or at least for several decades, it's going to give you a better chance to have a good cardiovascular system, for example.
Right.
I saw some research, something about this fatal heart attacks were reduced by like 35%. I don't know which study that was.
Yeah, that's a study where we looked at some of these what we call observational trials. And the classic one is called the Framingham study.
Right, the big Framingham study. Yeah.
And so what we've been able to do is some of those studies have actually measured omega-3 levels in the blood.
That's what I was interested in.
At the beginning, and then they followed them again over time to see who developed what diseases.
Right.
And in this particular paper you're talking about, we looked at people who had a low omega-3 index, an intermediate, and a high omega-3 index at the beginning of the study. And then we pooled, I think, 10 different studies together. And we looked at ultimately the rate of dying of heart disease. And we found that people who had the highest omega-3 at the beginning were about 35% less likely over the window of time to die of a heart attack.
I see. So that was a series of studies, observational studies put together, but you had a baseline omega-3 fats, and then you were able to look at the...
Right. And why that's important as opposed to just asking people, how much fish do you eat?
Yeah.
Which is a dietary intake questionnaire type of how much. So then people will ask that question and try to deduce how much omega-3 they're eating from how much fish do you eat. Well, obviously, omega-3 levels vary tremendously by different types of fish, and people don't remember what they eat. So measuring a blood level is much, much better than asking someone how much they eat.
Exactly. It really quantifies what's going on. That's why we're such a big fan of this omega-3 index.
We've looked at omega-3 levels and risk for death from any cause. And that was one that I was the first author on, published that last year. And in that particular coalition study, we saw that people who had the highest omega-3 levels compared to the lowest were roughly 10 to 12% less likely to die from anything, not just heart disease, not just cancer, anything in the last. So of course, these kind of studies, when you're asking about death, you wait long enough, guess what?
Mm.
Everybody dies.
Right.
Because everybody dies. So you have to say, okay, we're going to look at, say, a 10-year window. Who died in that 10-year window after age 65? Between 65 and 75 or 80, who died? And we found that the people that had the highest omega-3 were likely to live longer. And
so I think that's really very substantial. In fact, one of the topics we want to talk about is this work with longevity, and that seems like a really interesting piece. And what was the higher, if we take the omega-3 index, what was the higher level associated with that extended lifespan?
Roughly 7 to 8.
7 to 8.
Yeah. So that general area, but there are very few people who have, like you and I, frankly, 10, omega-3 index of 10. And many fewer who have a 12. So we don't know much at all about those really high levels. When we're dealing with population studies like we do in FORCE, you're just dealing with what you've got. And these are not supplementation studies.
That's just seeming, it's interesting because the Japanese, you figure, have about a 10 or 11 or 12. The Japanese
average of maybe 9 or 10, or at least they used to. I mean,
yeah, that's right. This is a concern with all these studies because the diet changes so dramatically.
The diet is changing in Japan. The diet is changing, and I'm afraid it's not changing in the right direction.
Yes, exactly. I, for example, because of my research on bone health, I decided to do 3,000 milligrams of EPA DHA together, and that's when I came up with this 10.5 on the omega index. And like you say, that's a pretty nice score, and I'll be happy with a 5 or 6 or 7 more years of life. So that sounds like a good idea. There were and the neat thing is you can quantify it. I think from my point of view, looking at the research, it's fair to say if you're in a low omega-3 index, if you have the standard American 4 or 4.2 or whatever, it's just like saying, hey, my vitamin D is only is low, but I think it's okay. I mean, it's like to me, it's quite reasonable to say this is not, you will enhance your longevity if you increase that nutrient to the level that we suspect is ideal, just like with vitamin D. Thousands of studies showing the benefits of higher levels. Some people have tried to disprove it, but we evolved in sunlight. Vitamin D is quite an important signaling hormone. So I'm pleased with
omega-3 is a little more directly related to diet than vitamin D is.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. How much would the average person have to take to get, you say 8? You say 8 is a fairly good level.
Yeah.
Even though
So to
you
go
might have
from,
over-
yeah, that's a great question, because so we've looked at this, I published on this. So if you want to take someone from a 4% omega-3 index, which is sort of low normal in America,
Uh-huh.
not unusual at all, 4% omega-3. And so again, that 4%, what does that mean? It means if you add up the amount of EPA and DHA,
Right.
two
Okay.
long chain omega in a red blood cell membrane, that's what this test measures. It's 4% means that EPA and DHA constitute 4% of the fatty acids in that membrane. There's
I see. So if I come up with a 10, the EPA and DHA is 10% of the fatty acids.
Exactly, 10% of the total fatty acids,
okay.
right? And so it's going from 4% to 8%. It takes about 1,500 milligrams of EPA and DHA on average.
In addition to whatever they're doing.
On top of whatever they're doing.
Right. Because we're gonna do this little experiment. One of my key people in the office came up with a 4. And so that's what we're gonna do. We're right now increasing that. So you think maybe 1,500 will get her to the 10.
Yeah, I mean, that's, if you want to, that's 50-50. I mean, that's the average amount it would take. So what that means is half of the people that would take 1,500 milligrams would get to that level or above, and the other half would get below. So the average is right there. If you want to be like 90% sure you're going to get over 8, you probably need to take 2,500 or maybe even 3,000.
Dr. Harris, is there any issue with, taking that 3,000 or 4,000 or a higher dose of omega-3 fats? Any concerns that we should be thinking about?
No, I mean, you want a good quality product. You don't want to have a burp back.
Right.
But there are ways to get around that anyway. And taking, we think you're more efficient to take a triglyceride-based oil than a ethyl ester. The ethyl esters are a form of the pharmaceutical products are in. But they don't seem to be quite as effective. They're not absorbed quite as well as a triglyceride-based product.
Yes, we use a triglyceride-based product. Yeah.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. But no safety. They've looked up to 5-6 grams a day. Different food safety agencies around the world, particularly Norway, most recently, and said they can't find any risk, any adverse effects that you need to worry about. And the ones people think about are bleeding.
Great.
And we've published a lot of other people. Phil Calder in England has published on this and asking the question, do omega-3s really increase the risk for clinically significant bleeding? And that's the important distinction. Clinically significant bleeding. I mean, like hemorrhage.
Yeah.
Like bleeding out from something. I mean, if you're shaving and you cut yourself a little bit, you're probably going to bleed longer if you've got higher omega-3. But the question is that a healthier? I mean, actually, are we bleeding too little, too short in the normal American setting? And when you're high omega-3, now you're bleeding the right amount.
Yeah.
And we think of it as increasing your bleeding, but actually it's just going to the right level.
1,000, 2,000 might take a person up to a good level, but the best way, just measure your level. You can know what's happening. How often would you measure? Would you measure it like every year or every 6 months? Or I suppose, how long does it take? If I change my dose, how long does it take to see the effect?
To see the effect, I mean, again, to get a new steady state is really what you want.
To get a new steady state.
Because you're going to be changing slowly, right? And when does it level off? Roughly 4 months, 4 to 6 months, because we're measuring the red blood cell. Red blood cells, you got a new crop, completely new crop every 4 months.
I see. So when you replace the red blood cells, then you can see every 4 months. Okay.
Right. That's the optimal. And once you're at a level, I mean, I think the thing to do there, if maybe check it once a year, if you're continuing with your supplementation regimen.
Yes.
I mean, you can't, this is not like, you can't get to the right level and then stop and think it's going to stay there.
Exactly.
Right back down. Yeah.
It's like the other, you got to keep bringing those nutrients in. We certainly see that with vitamin D in every nutrient. What about children? I mean, I see such interesting studies on children, brain development, neurological development, vision development. What's a good dose? And even in utero. So what's the dose for children? If I had a child too.
Well, let's start with pregnancy.
Mhm.
So what's the dose for mom?
Yeah. Okay.
While she's feeding her baby. And we think from a variety of angles, probably somewhere between 750 or 1,000 milligrams EPA DHA a day is probably optimal.
For the mother to take.
For the mother during particularly the second half of pregnancy. I mean, that's when brain development really takes off. Ideally, it's
what omega-3 index? What index would she have if she only did 800?
Oh, she did it. I mean, this is an interesting question because most of the research of late has been focusing on the risk for premature birth.
Right, I saw that. Yeah, okay.
Which is not a baby's problem. I mean, it is a baby's problem, but it's not a human development. It's not worried about the eye and learning and vision and all that of the baby. She's delivering early, so the baby's being deprived of some of that precious time in utero to develop the brain normally. So we know that women who are low in omega-3, probably below a omega-3 index of roughly, I'd say 6, are more likely to deliver prematurely.
Omega-3 level below 6.
Yeah. So no, we have a test. You have the omega-3 index test in your hand. We have another kit just like that. It's called the mother's DHA, something like that. But it's the red blood cell DHA level, because DHA is the omega-3 that's particularly important in pregnancy.
I see. So you're looking, and that's a good thing to remember when you talk about omega-3s. You're talking about the EPA and the DHA, and the DHA really has a very important effect on brain. And in fact, I understand a lot of the brain fat cells are
there's a lot of DHA in the brain. Exactly.
So the pregnant mother might favor taking some DHA.
Yeah, I mean, it obviously doesn't hurt to take EPA plus DHA. That's fine.
Mm-hmm.
But DHA is the part that women need to get. And their current, I think the standard recommendations are 200 milligrams of DHA a day that women should get above and beyond what they're normally eating, which is in America.
But let's go beyond the standard. Let's go to the optimum that we're trying to.
And so from that we have to look at intervention studies.
Uh-huh.
And the most recent intervention studies from the University of Kansas, Dr. Carlson, she showed that giving about 1,000 milligrams a day to pregnant women will reduce their risk for premature birth. And actually, it also has some benefits on the baby too.
Yes, exactly.
And part of that is simply by being in utero longer.
Yes, exactly. Of course. Was that 1,000 DHA or DHA?
That was 1,000 DHA.
1,000 DHA, and maybe with whatever EPA might come with it, or if you want to.
Well, yeah, the product she was using was an algal-based DHA product. So
she was kind of fragmented. She was just looking at DHA to get to that endpoint of preventing premature births.
Yeah, and that's what the study was about. It's called the ADORE study. It stands for something. They all stand for something.
And she do the omega-3 index?
Yeah, she measured omega-3 levels.
And what
she didn't. I mean, this is part of the when you get down in the weeds of omega-3 testing, it's complicated because different laboratories do it different ways.
I see.
And the number you get, so we're talking about, say, we like an omega-3 index of 8. Mm-hmm. Some other lab may measure omega-3 levels not in red blood cells. They might measure them in the plasma or in the liquid part of the blood. And then your omega-3 level might be, an optimal might be 6. Because there's the fatty acids in the blood are different concentrations than the fatty acids in the red cells. And other laboratories measure things different ways. So we're really trying to work on a harmonization plan to try to get to where everybody uses the same method.
Yes, of course. It's very complicated.
That's pretty complicated. But in any event, Yeah, I mean, when we're talking about omega-3s in human development, there's benefits for mom and the baby in that pregnancy period, partly to reduce risk for premature birth and partly to help develop the brain better. So that's the other piece of it. What's it do for the baby?
Yes.
And that's where we're seeing definite benefits in visual function early on, particularly retinal function. And there are some metrics of IQ that have been a few points of IQ that have been gained by giving omega-3. Again, not every study shows that. Some do, some don't. They never show a downside to it. Mm-hmm. It's always no effect or better, which is good.
And the same thing with pregnancy. I mean, there's no downside. If a woman said, "Hey, I like your plan of using this 3,000 that's got quite a bit of DHA and maybe 1,500 of EPA," there's no problem with doing that.
No.
And the same with the children. I heard 1,000 milligrams of EPA DHA mix. Is that reasonable, or what do you think?
It's reasonable. I mean, for children's health.
Yes, for children.
We're not talking about infants now. We're talking about children.
I'm talking about children. Yeah, maybe.
Yeah. And that's very unexplored area. I wouldn't disagree that would be a reasonable amount to eat. It's certainly not going to hurt anybody, for sure. We just haven't really got enough data in children.
Yes.
Children are tough to study. And brain development, mental development, cognitive capabilities are really soft endpoints that are tough to measure. So that's an area there's a lot of interest in. It's still being worked on, for sure.
Yes. I know, and I'm pressing you for practical things, but so if a woman has a child who's not breastfeeding anymore, but maybe he's 1-2 years old, maybe just some of these.
I think if you get 500 in, that's 500 is 5 times the average American intake.
Okay, good.
So I mean, holy cow, that's a great step.
Perfect. Let's talk a little bit about longevity. You did mention the Framingham study suggesting that perhaps a 5-year difference in longevity, the people who had a higher omega-3 fat level as opposed to the person with an average 4-point level. I think I saw some other studies here too on this. Well, the FORCE study, right, has already seen some reduction in all-cause mortality. You were saying,
right,
13%.
Cardiovascular mortality, all-cause mortality.
Cardiovascular 15, all-cause mortality 13%, something like that.
Yeah, which is pretty interesting because it implies, because we looked in that study, which we published last year, and we had 45,000 people in it. It was a big study. That if you look at the highest versus the lowest levels of omega-3, the highest was associated with total mortality down, lower risk for death in that window of time. But and we saw it in cardiovascular mortality, death from cardiovascular, and we saw it in cancer mortality. And we saw it in that big bucket of everything else mortality.
Right.
Whether it's accidents, whether it's pulmonary disease, whether it's a chronic infection, kidney disease, everything else in that other bucket of other causes of death, that was also reduced.
Yes.
By high omega-3. So the omega-3s are not just about the heart. And I think
and doesn't it make sense if every cell membrane has omega-3 in it, and the cell membrane is like the brain of your cell, I would tend to say, or your communication center, it makes sense that nature has given it a really important position. But that's striking. Very large studies showing a reduction in these major causes of death, whether it's heart disease, cancer.
Right. So I think that's the strongest evidence to date. So the telomere is a section of every strand of DNA that's in your cells. Of course, we have 46 chromosomes, 23 pairs, and in the DNA. And at the end of each one of those 46, there is a section of the DNA called the telomere. Telo means the end in Greek, so telomere. And that section of the DNA is there to keep it from reacting with other parts of DNA that's not supposed to touch. And it's sort of like, I think the best example is if you think about your shoelace, there's that little plastic tip on your shoelace. It's called an aglet. I didn't realize that until I looked it up. And that keeps your shoelace from fraying.
It holds it together, right? Protects it.
Holds it together. So that's kind of the telomere. And every time your cell replicates, you have a new generation of cells. You got that a little bit of that telomere doesn't make it to the next generation. Okay. It shrinks, and it shrinks a little bit more each next generation, a little more the next generation, until after X number of cell replications, your cells replicate itself. The telomere is gone, and the cell won't divide anymore. So it's a marker of aging. It's a marker of aging, and that telomere marker of aging then is influenced. You found that related to the omega-3 fat levels. Right. Higher levels of omega-3, we showed over a 5-year period, were associated with the slowest rate of shrinking of that telomere region. People who had the low omega-3, the telomere shrank a lot. People who had the higher omega-3s didn't shrink much at all. Those anti-aging effects are really very interesting. So you would be looking at a level of 8 maybe on your test to say that maybe associated with telomeres, or a little higher level? What do you think? No, about that. Yeah, somewhere again, that 8 seems to be, that was sort of our first guess. In 2004 we put this together. When we first came up with the omega-3 index, we said 8% is the target based on the evidence we had at that point. And in the 15, 17 years since, it's just been confirmed, I think, more and more that region, 7, 8, 9% is a good place to be. It's not obviously it's not a black and white. Yes, it's not a white line. It's gradation. So people who have an omega-3 index of 7 are definitely better off than 5. Yeah. 8's a little better than 7, and then it kind of runs out of, well, can we say that 11's better than 10? Yeah, I don't know if you can. We haven't got data. You haven't really sorted to look at, like, pick out the 10s. People had choose a 10 level on this if they were any better telomere length. Yeah. No, and there's so few people like that. It's hard to do studies. It's just you and me, Susan. That's it. Yes, you and me. Well, we'll do a study of all of you who get a 10 level. Let me know. We'll try to keep track of that. So the argument for longevity is really very interesting, but it's not just anti-aging. It's also that it has so many benefits on heart health. It looks like it's also exercise performance. It looks like it's very good for protecting from autoimmune disease. I've seen some research on even children helps to, because I think of the anti-inflammatory action. Tell me a little bit about, have you, I know your specialty is heart, but have you thought about that, about autoimmunity and the immune system? Well, I think you said the magic word. It's inflammation. Mm-hmm. And we are learning more and more the omega-3's role in keeping the inflammatory reaction down. You can't suppress it completely, because then you'd be totally susceptible to infections, and that would not be good at all. So it's a balance. And what the omega-3s do, two things generally, writ large, in the inflammation. They prevent inflammation from getting going to some extent, not too much. Okay. And there is now, we realize, a active process of, once you have an inflammatory response, a proper one, you've got an infection. Yeah, protective one. Yeah. You get that inflammatory response has got to go away once the job is done. We used to think, we didn't even think about it. We just sort of thought, well, it just sort of wore out, or but no. There is actually a very specific program production of molecules that are made from omega-3 fatty acids. They're called resolvins, protectins, morasins. But these are molecules that are very unique. They are what they call pro-resolving mediators, and they're made from omega-3 fats. So you haven't got the omega-3s, you don't make them. You can't make them. Yeah. You got the omega-3s, you make them, and these molecules, when they're made, they actively shut down the inflammatory response. I see. So the omega-3s can stop it on both ends, and that's, I think, one of the, where if there is one common cause or mechanism of action of omega-3 in health, it's anti-inflammatory.
And it sort of links back to the normalization, right? I mean, you need some inflammation when you get infected with something. You need the white blood cells to come and attack it, but then you need the turnoff switch, and you need.
Exactly.
So this is a building block for the turnoff switch, but you also need all that basic material so the immune system can do its repair job. I mean,
Gotcha. Right.
Chronic repair
Oh,
deficit is something we talk about a lot, and
oh yeah, okay, sure. In bone, absolutely.
a whole series of nutrients, but the key role, that's a very interesting, the key role of omega-3 fats in both the building blocks to be able to produce that.
Right. To produce these pro-resolving mediators.
Yeah, exactly.
You got to have EPA and DHA around.
Shut off the inflammation. Yep. Do the omega-3 fats have do you ever speak of them in terms of antioxidant qualities?
Yeah, yes, less. We talk about that, but there's certainly good evidence that they reduce oxidative stress, which is kind of a
exactly
garbage term. It's a big term. What does that mean exactly? But there are definitely studies showing that oxidative stress is reduced by having higher omega-3 levels.
Let's just talk a bit about the brain. You know, a lot of these protocols for dementia, for Alzheimer's, really talk about the omega-3 fats and the fact that the DHA in particular, there's the brain utilizes a lot of DHA, and I guess most of the omega-3 fat in the brain is DHA. Is that correct? And can you?
Yeah. Most of the omega-3 in the brain, virtually all of it is DHA.
And so tell us a little bit about what the studies you might have heard about the cognitive functioning
and so we have published. I mean, I mentioned this Framingham study earlier. We looked several years ago at we used the omega-3 index marker that test provides, and we looked at it in Framingham across the range of people, and these folks had all had brain MRI scans, so they could tell the size of the brain. And, you know, as you age, your brain shrinks. And so we did find that people well, something shrink.
I'm sorry.
So the higher the omega-3, the less brain shrinkage these people had experienced. Plus the better they performed on cognitive function tests. There's a whole battery of tests people do to measure cognitive function. Executive function, how fast you can touch the screen, you know. So that was just an association there with cognitive function. We're working on a paper right now. We're hoping to get published soon, looking back in that same group of people in Framingham and asked not how is it related to cognitive function, but whether you actually developed Alzheimer's disease or not.
Right.
Obviously, before you died. So that's the question. And we are finding that people with the higher omega-3 levels were significantly less likely to develop Alzheimer's disease during the follow-up in Framingham. So.
Yes, and that's very interesting. And I know people like Dr. Bredesen and people with serious programs for helping with Alzheimer's use the omega-3 fats abundantly.
Yeah, right.
That's very exciting research. And another reason that a central nutrient found in every cell, life-supporting, good reason to think that we should probably watch our levels, pay attention to our levels.
Right. Yeah, there's not too many nutrients that you really can control, monitor, optimize your levels like you can omega-3. It's very susceptible to it. Many other vitamins, it's hard to get a blood test that truly reflects tissue levels because for a variety of reasons, but omega-3 is one of the unique ones that it really does reflect tissue levels and you can control it.
That it's stored. And I do think if we talk about all these 300 articles, I keep pulling up your little test kit because
that's okay.
Well, to me, because we're all about helping ourselves and helping the public maximize their health, and to be able to take it into a person's hands to say, look, I can quantify this. I understand. I see the research. I see there's a benefit to it. It's truly life supporting. There's nothing harmful coming from this. And if I want to know I have the right dose, or at least I'm at a level where we see associated with much better health outcomes, less diabetes, less heart disease, less cancer, less all-cause mortality, even even this ability to recover from exercise. I've seen some nice exercise studies saying that, you know, better performance, better. So you'd like to say, yeah, well, let me just check it out. So I really salute you for taking the effort to develop a test that the public could use. This is the new age. The new age, we're all going to be wearing our monitors and we're all going to be testing ourselves, you know?
Right. Good. And it's just the right time. You have a test that you can do at home.
It's the right time. We're sort of impressed with the work on depression. Have you paid much attention to that?
Yeah, that's a little that's very interesting. The studies on depression, when they're looking at omega-3 levels related to risk of depression. Obviously, depression is a brain issue. We would think, and everybody thought, DHA, if anything is going to be related to depression, it's going to be DHA. And so several trials have been done trying to affect depressive symptoms by giving DHA. And it hasn't worked all that well, it hasn't hurt anything, but it hasn't really done much. But when they give products that are richer in EPA, they seem to get better benefit on depressive symptoms. So it's just a little bit wacky.
Well, but like you said, it's very complex. So we don't know. We
don't know.
When you think
right. And it could be some of the anti-inflammatory, even though the EPA is not really part of the brain tissue. EPA certainly circulates through the brain in the blood vessels. And that's where maybe some anti-inflammatory effects of EPA, unique ones of EPA, might play a role in affecting brain and function. But depression is a really,
it's so
complicated.
Yes. But the thing of science trying to fragment it and say this one nutrient's going to have this action. We like to look at the composite, and we look at the overall. These very large studies you do are really interesting because you're eking out some very important benefits of these fats. And certainly we can't pin any one nutrient's not going to do a lot of individual things, but as a composite, that's why we say get all the 40 key nutrients, get the 20 key nutrients for bone, but to the omega-3 fats, so it wouldn't hurt. Like we have a mix of EPA and DHA from anchovy, a really nice one that Alkaline for Life produces. Now, I encourage people, well, with the bone health, we like to get 3,000. Maybe some people get 2,000. It's EPA and DHA. So that seems like a reasonable protocol. No problems with that. And then measure your levels maybe every 6 months would be until when you get a good level. Am I wrong in thinking that if you have a issue with cognitive concern, you might ratchet up a little the DHA? Because this might have like 600 or 700 milligrams of DHA in it.
Yeah, that would probably make sense.
Yeah,
try to get around 1,000 milligrams of DHA. Maybe.
Yeah, to get addition to that's what we do. When we
have I would think that would make a lot of sense.
Yeah. You've been very generous with your time. I love talking to the scientists. They always correct me on all my little casual comments, but I think that it's
been very good. You're quite obviously well versed in this.
Well,
I appreciate it.
Not well enough.
Done your homework.
You are truly a scientist, and like I mentioned, I'm going to share some information with Dr. Harris on what I see on bone health in the omega-3 fats and why I picked the dose of 3,000 milligrams. But I hope all of you listening will take the trouble to get yourself tested, get your family tested. This is such a simple thing to do. And in fact, Bill, of all the things you've done over these 40 years, if you look at the public and the public impact, I mean, just in closing, could you reflect on what, if you said to me, hey, what was some of the really turned out to be important outcomes of what I was able to contribute to this, to science, actually?
Well, you're holding it in your hand. That's it. I mean, so many scientists, and myself included, do publish studies. We find out this little fact over there. We investigate a mechanism. It doesn't really impact the public. I think the invention of the omega-3 index really can bring science to the benefit of health. And so I'm just really proud that it's been received so well and it's worked so well and being used more and more around the world. And I think in the next 20, 30 years, they're going to be eventually, I may never see it, but hopefully it's part of every annual physical exam, just like your cholesterol test is.
That's the day we
great.
should all envision. That's right. Just like we're doing now, we're starting to do maybe C-reactive protein, maybe vitamin D if we push for it. One of these days, we're going to measure omega-3 fats, and we're going to owe it. We're going to owe it to Dr. Harris. And who's your colleague who helped you develop this?
Dr. Clemens von Schacke. He's a cardiologist in Munich, Germany.
And you two guys sat down after some meeting and said, "Hey, this is important stuff. We got to make it available."
We got to make it. So he started a lab in Germany. I started a lab in the U.S. and we've been collaborators.
Well, I congratulate you on that. And luckily, our audience now doesn't have to wait decades before this gets to the public. You can take charge of your own health.
Right. Get
your omega-3 tested, get your vitamin D tested, pay attention to these simple markers.
Great.
Well, I take a deep breath and I bow down to you for your generosity, for your time, and mostly for your dedication, single focused dedication over the decades to omega-3 fats.
Well, it's been a fun ride. Appreciate talking to you.
What could we ask for? You've moved the world ahead, and it was a fun ride.
Good. Well, it still is. So you and I get offline. Let's catch up on this bone stuff. I'd like to learn some more from you.
We will. We'll close this webinar now. I thank all of you for listening. We're going to be talking more with Dr. Harris. I'll give you some of the links to some of his many discussions, but take his advice, my friends. Get yourself tested. Take your omega-3 fats. We'll all live longer and happier. See you later. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Susan.
Bye-bye. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us. Just seeing that interview again reminds me of what a great person Dr. Harris was. And this brilliant idea to figure out how we could actually measure the real amount of this particular nutrient, this EPA and DHA that we had in our blood with this simple prick test. And like he said, I'm sure one day this will be part of every standard physical. In fact, one of you, we have many questions. And even though we tried to make the video really clear by putting the subtitles and everything, there's still a lot of questions. So I'm going to go over some of the questions, as many as we have time for. Know that the video will be posted so you can see it over and over again. But a lot of the questions related, of course, to how do I get the omega-3 fats? How do I test my levels? And we can start out with a lot of the questions about this different types of omega-3 fats. Like many of the people who wrote in are actually, like Kathy wrote in right early, and she was talking about the fact that she takes some amount of EPA and DHA from algae. These people that if you don't want to eat the fish product from algae, and she also takes some nuts and seeds and all this. But her omega-3 index is only 4.2, and that's really kind of what the standard American one is. So you could be thinking, well, I'm getting the omega-3 I need from my fish, my algae EPA DHA product. But when you do the test, you see you're not getting an adequate level. So the neat thing is to be able to test yourself. If you say, look, I think I'm getting it from diet, and I think, which is really, you want to check that out. I think I'm getting it from diet, and I think my vegetarian sources are working pretty well. Then you simply test it out. It is, in Kathy's case, she's interested in bone health. We know that osteoporosis is inflammatory. So we look for all these strong anti-inflammatory substances like the omega-3 fats, like the antioxidants, like quercetin, vitamin C. We really like all of these. And for many years, omega-3 fats has been high on my list of substances that can reduce the inflammation of bone loss. Another, I think it was Kathy also who mentioned that she gets the omega testing through a naturopath in Canada and wanted to know, excuse me, if our test kit would work. And our test kit can work in Canada. You can purchase it here and we send it to Canada, and then you send it back and we get you the results. She wanted to know about the omega-3 index. Of course, Dr. Harris talked a lot about the omega-3 index, and it can go from just 3 or 4 to 10 or 11 or 12. And like in my personal case, it's 10, and I do about 4,000 milligrams of the EPA DHA a day. And she wanted to know if about the ratios. This test is really interesting because it comes with a very thorough report that not only tells you the DHA and the EPA in every cell, the ratio of that to the other fats in the cells, but it also tells you the ratios of the omega-6s to the omega-3s. And as a whole, we have too many omega-6s and too little omega-3 fats. And the material that comes, the report that comes with the test, explains to you the ratio you're looking at. And one of you actually asks about that ratio and the omega ratios of those 6s to the 3s. You want that only to be like 3-to-1 or 5-to-1, where many people have a much higher level. We'll find in here. There was one person that really, it shows that you need more omega-3 fats if your ratio of the 6s to the 3s is off. So someone wants to know, should I alter my daily supplement based on diet? That is, eating a salmon a day. Sure. I mean, if you eat a salmon a day, you can check and see what your ratio is. And that's an interesting question because, fish is great, but, some of the fish is not contaminated, is contaminated. Some of the fish doesn't have, if you get farm-raised salmon, for example, it's not going to have very much EPA, DHA. The beauty of Dr. Harris's work is he's shown the values, looking cross-culturally and in many large studies, and trying to put together several studies, because as he mentioned, you can get conflicting data on different studies. But he looks at the trends over all these studies and the ability to test. So you may say, look, I'm taking a salmon a day. Great. Then we'd say, well, just check your level and see if you're getting what you need. That's the beauty of it, that you can simply test your level and see if you're getting what you need. Someone also asked if they should eat more herring, or if they should eat more of another kind of fish. Well, again, you can just test. The fattier fish generally has more EPA and DHA, but you can always test your level, and that's going to tell you exactly what's happening. And it's pretty interesting. Like Dr. Harris said, there's few nutrients that we can actually test the real level in the body at this particular time. And these omega-3 fats, they are in the red cell blood membrane, and they stay there quite a long time. So you can take a dose now, and maybe 6 months later, at least 3 months later, you check and see how that's affected the red blood cell membranes, because they have quite a long life in the body. I mean, they get on this cell membrane and they stay there until the red blood cell is recycled. I'm taking a vegan algae-based omega-3 supplement with 500 milligrams. Now, the vegan supplements are sort of low dose generally. The algae is 500 milligrams of EPA and DHA combined. As I mentioned to you, in the protocol, that the research I see suggests the more optimum level is 3,000. So you got a problem if you only get 500. You have to take many of those supplements to get of the algae-based supplements to get the level you want. And so, and this person's level is actually the omega-3 index is 2.6, which is really quite low. Many people in this country might have a 4. So 2.6 is very low. We're looking for an 8 or 9 ideally. So she's eating flaxseed and chia and all that, but it's not being converted into the omega-3 fats in the body. So, you might think, is there another source of omega-3 fats? Also, somebody asked a very interesting question about when fish oils are becoming so popular that it's quite a job to find very high quality fish oils, and they have to be extremely purified because of all the contamination of the waters. And what we use an omega-3 fat from anchovy off the coast of Chile, and it's just from anchovy. And so one person writes and says, I'm allergic to fish. What do I do? Of course, you want your nuts and seeds and other sources, but the mighty omega that we produce is just anchovy, and we have both capsules and liquid. I like the liquid because 1 teaspoon is nearly 3,000, and each capsule is 1,000, so it's pretty convenient. But so if you have a problem with the with fish, you can, if the company specifies the source of fish, unless you're allergic to anchovy, this product would be okay. You know, there is such a demand worldwide because, Dr. Harris mentioned to me, he told me this is the most highly studied nutrient in all of history. There's thousands and thousands of articles, and he became one of the top most frequently cited scientists amongst the top 2% of scientists in the country to be highly cited for his work on omega-3 fats, because everyone's been looking at them for decades so carefully. He said that in the future, what they'll probably develop is a synthetic omega-3 fat. And, wouldn't we love it if we took care of the oceans and we had a certain population that we could afford to provide good food for everyone? And I think just like we have to regenerate the soils, we have to regenerate the oceans. That's such an important issue. But for now, you can do either your high quality supplements, you can test your level and then see how you need to adjust it. Let's see here. So, Donna asked about autoimmune disease and a daughter who has Crohn's disease. I have worked many years with autoimmune disease, and we're going to start giving some lectures and some workshops on autoimmune disease because my original mentor, Dr. Russell Jaffe, has a wonderful program for autoimmune disease, and I've helped many, many people go into remission from autoimmune disease. And you certainly want anti-inflammatory agents. So this is why the omega-3 fats, presuming a person is not allergic to any of those fish, because autoimmunity often involves allergic or hypersensitive responses that weaken the immune system. But these substances we use them in the autoimmune programs really consistently over the decades because they help to reduce inflammation. Let's see, there's so many interesting questions. People write, how do you do the omega-3 test? Well, it's pretty simple. You just purchase one of these little kits. And every time I see this interview with Dr. Harris, it opens my heart that he said he feels this is the most important contribution he's made, is to figure out how anybody at home can test their omega-3 level. It's really kind of a remarkable thing. So I eat largely a vegetarian diet. Is there any problem eating too much omega-3? Well, you'd have a hard time getting too much omega-3 on a vegetarian diet. And I asked specifically Dr. Harris if there was any problem with taking a high amount of omega-3 fats. And he said, no, he's never seen anything of record like that. Certainly, do I feel I need to go beyond the 10 score? I really don't feel I need to go beyond the 10 score, 10 of the omega-3 fat index. However, I do take extra consideration for DHA, because DHA is what is very effective to protect the brain from excessive aging and excessive shrinkage, like the studies show. So you cannot get too, he reports you wouldn't, there's no reporting of too much, but the same thing, you get your index. If you have an 8 or 9, he says that's fine. I happen to like to go for a 10. Can a test get done at your doctor's office? You can certainly ask your doctor to do it. Is one of these new tests that generally a progressive doctor might know about it. If you have to pay for it through an insurance company, through your doctor, it's probably going to cost you a lot more than to get this kit and do it yourself. Can we get enough omega-3 from your Barlean's fish oil? Barlean's fish oil, the omega fish oils, Carlson's fish oils, they will all be helpful. And how you know if you've got enough is you just test. You say, maybe I like this brand, I like that brand. You just test yourself. Like I say, my personal thing is I like the liquid anchovy because it doesn't taste very strong, and 1 teaspoon has almost 3,000. It's like 2,500 milligrams. But there are many fine, really carefully purified. You want a very highly purified omega-3 fat. Somebody says they have low blood pressure. Is it risky to take omega-3 fats? It's so interesting. I love my little analogy that omega-3 fats are like yoga. They increase flexibility. They increase the fluidity of the cell, of the vessels, of the what can come in and out of the red blood cells. And so they influence the flexibility of the blood. So the blood pressure tends to decrease a little, but it's not in any way that it's detrimental. In fact, I myself have low blood pressure too. And the omega-3 fats do not have any detrimental. It's more like normalizing. What I did think was interesting is that omega-3 fats will decrease the heartbeats, maybe just by 1 beat, 1 beat per minute or whatever he said. And this seems to be associated with longevity. Those of you who like to study Ayurvedic medicine from India or traditional Chinese medicine, they say we only are given so many heartbeats. And so, if we slow down our heart rate, the animals with slower heart rates tend to live longer. I think that's kind of interesting. Will more omega-3s help with severe osteoporosis? Now, again, I think personally, what I would strive for is the level that, like they see in Japan, like an 8, 9, 10 level, because those people live longer and for many different reasons, like he explained. So they will help with the osteoporosis. It will more help. I mean, I would aim for an 8. He says, you've heard Dr. Harris say he thinks 8 is okay. He himself has a higher level. He has a 10 himself. But you could aim for an 8 and say, look, how much do I have to take to get an 8? And that is certainly sufficient for the osteoporosis, to help with the osteoporosis. Let's see. It's like this person has my omega. You'll see this test is really nice because it also measures omega-6 to omega-3 ratios outside of just giving the really interesting omega-3 index, where how much EPA and DHA you have in the cell. But you can also see how much omega-6. Now, these are from these seed oils like canola and safflower and soy. Oftentimes, those oils really cause a lot of inflammation. So you want to keep your omega-6s a little bit down, and you want your omega-3s to be nice and sturdy. And this person had really, the ratio was quite off. She had many 2 omega-6s to the omega-3. The index was like 11. So you want to have a much lower ratio of omega-6s to omega-3s. And the report comes with the test comes with a nice summary of how to interpret the results. So you can look at your results and understand it. It also talks about trans fats. You probably heard of trans fats, these toxic oils that they've been able to put in food. And in fact, they're making them illegal because they're so damaging to the body. They're used to stabilize foods, and they had all this kind of snack food and fast food. And it's surprising. Like, I think I have a clean diet, but still there's some trans fats that show up. So it's helpful also to see some of are you getting too much trans fats? Are you getting too much arachidonic acid, which is also an inflammatory substance that you create when you have a lot of omega-6 seed oils? So you can gauge those and say, I better get reduce the seed oil, eat more nuts and seeds themselves, and try to lower that ratio. So you see many different. This is the complete version of the omega-3 index. So you get several different tests on the fatty acids in the body, not just the omega-3 index. Let's see what else we got here. I am a woman, 61 years old. What benefit for my age? Is it too late? It's interesting. Dr. Harris was trying to help us understand the different studies that you see. In fact, somebody wrote about Dr. Greger and said, Dr. Greger says that the omega-3 fats don't help with heart disease. Well, what happens is, if you pick, some studies will show a very good effect, some studies will show less effect, some studies show no effect. Greger picked the study that showed no effect in regards to heart disease. And I respect Dr. Greger. I think he's done an amazing amount to turn our attention back to basic whole vegetable foods. But essentially, like Dr. Harris said, you have to look at the whole body of studies. And what they're doing now, like this consortium they had, this FORCE consortium, looked like many different studies over 15 years, and they saw definitely a very direct benefit for the heart and a reduction of sudden death of heart attacks. What they saw when they put there was 17 cohort studies, and They controlled for many factors, and they looked over 16 years, and they saw that those with the highest omega-3 fat compared to the people with the lowest had to decrease deaths from all-cause mortality, 13% less death, 13% less death from any cause if you had a higher omega-3 fat. And this was a long-term study with 17 different large studies all over the world. And then the decrease of cardiovascular disease was 15%, and a 13%, 11% reduction in cancer. And even like all-cause mortality was down by 13%. So if you put the studies all together, you see a very substantial cardiovascular benefit, particularly a great reduction in sudden heart attacks. So we like to look at the big picture. And in relation to the 61-year-old woman, I would say it's not too late. It's greater if we could have lifelong exposure, but it's never too late to start giving the body all the nutrients it needs. And the omega-3 fats, many people will notice right away that their dry eyes are better, for example, that they feel that they have less inflammation. Wherever there's pain, there's inflammation. Wherever there's inflammation, there's repair gone wrong. The body hasn't been able to repair itself. You know, someone mentioned, one of you write that you're taking the omega-3 fats, but you still have dry eyes. And, you know, that's a little bit unusual because omega-3 fats have been really documented to help dry eyes. So I would have the doctor look at other causes of the dry eyes. You might be familiar, there's an autoimmune disease called Sjogren's disease, which is associated with dry eyes. So, and dry skin. This person reports dry skin and dry eyes. We never want to, my goal is not to try to diagnose or treat anything, just show basic information on the nutrients and how the nutrients might be able to help you. So look into any health problems you have with very qualified, maybe even a functional medicine doctor you could find to help to look to, is there another cause to this dry skin, these dry eyes? Let's see. So what's the optimum level of the omega-3 fats? As I've mentioned many times, the omega-3 index, you'd like to see, Dr. Harris accepts 8. I like a 10. Just get yourself tested and you will know, that's for sure. Let's see what else we've got here that we can answer. A lot of people ask about algae, DHEA, EPA, and I would say take the form you like, take the vegetarian form you like, and let's see how the results come. There is an ability to convert some of the alpha-linolenic acid from some of the seeds and nuts into omega-3s. It's into EPA and DHA. It's a very low conversion factor. But you may find, look, in my case, if I take a little of the algae and then I take these nuts and seeds that have alpha-linolenic acid, that then I can get a good ratio. The nice part about it is you can test the ratio and you can decide how you're adjusting your diet and your supplements to correct the ratio. I have psoriasis of the scalp. I was taking omega-3 until a friend said her husband had eczema on his legs, and when he quit the omega-3, it cleared up. Is omega-3 good for psoriasis? So this is where we really need to step back and say psoriasis is an autoimmune disease. The body is attacking itself. And so we want to get to the cause of that autoimmune disease. It might have been nice that for one person, just some omega-3 fats might have helped for this fellow who had eczema on his legs. That's great. It's a good thing to try. But you want to get to many nutrients are important for autoimmune disease, and you want to get to the cause of the autoimmune disease. And like, for example, if you happen to be allergic to the fish that you were eating, that you got the omega-3s from, you could very well worsen an autoimmune disease, like worsen the psoriasis. We always want to try to look at the big picture and look at how can we what's really happening, what is the disorder, and how can we regain health. But rarely does one single nutrient make a difference. But if you react to a nutrient, that's a good sign you shouldn't be using it, or a source of a particular nutrient. How can you ensure your fish oil supplements aren't contaminated by heavy metals and toxins? Now, that's a really important question, because if you go to the supermarket and buy some inexpensive oil, you got to really wonder about it. Now, the government supposedly really regulates that these oils, fish oils, have to be distilled. The fish oil we use, we have a whole very comprehensive video on the detailed purification projects, the way that is purified. But it's very important to get an assay of your product, just to have them send you information on, they have to be tested for contaminants, heavy metals, pesticides, all that. It's good in any supplement you use, make sure that you see some assays of purity. And on the other hand, let's all just put a little attention on working to regenerate our soils, our waters, our ocean, and our animal life. Get assays on the products and use very reputable companies. How many servings of fish weekly as an alternative to taking supplements? I don't know. You see, some fish have a lot of omega-3 fats, some very little. In fact, they even say that, I was told by my professor that you take some salmon, you buy some in the store, one could have a lot of omega-3 fats, one would have very little. We do know that farm-raised omega-3 fats, salmon, do not have as much. So this is where the test is really a beauty, because you're like, I'm eating this fish, I'm eating it 3 times a week. Let me see how my omega-3 fats are. The guesswork is taken out of it, because you can actually assess your level with this test. Now, let me show you one thing. Yeah. So some people ask about these other oils like walnuts and flax and all that. And if you want to be scientific, take the oils that you think that have alpha-linolenic acid that may be converted into EPA and DHA, and then kind of keep track of how much you're eating, see what your index is. I mean, that's just the only way to do it, really, that I know of. Some people might convert more of these plant sources into EPA and DHA than others. Some do convert more. Let's see what else we got. If there's anything else we can answer before we close tonight. Let's see. Oh, here's a couple. Yeah, let's see if we can. Alpha-linolenic acid is another sort of omega-3 fat, and that some of that can be converted into EPA, DHA, but it's not a high level, and maybe 15-20%. It depends on individuals. Therefore, if you're eating lots of nuts and seeds and you're banking on the plant-based conversion into omega-3 fats, just test it. Test your level and see. Some people may be taking flax and that may convert somewhat, but you can test and find out. How many servings of fish weekly as an alternative to supplementing? Again, unfortunately, the fish doesn't come with a little tag. I have so much EPA, so much DHA. It's the fat, it's the oil in the fish. Fattier fish have more of it. So if you pick a high quality fish, we know salmon is famous, but the other fatty fish like mackerel, for example, if you like it, or some people like a lot of sardines, and just see how well you do. And you can look up the standard omega-3 content of the different fish and choose your fish based on that. Walnuts, flax, and hemp seeds, again, I would say these are great sources of important essential fats. Can you convert them to DHA? Well, you can test and see. Can I have my holistic doctor order an omega-3 test for me? Sure. I think the holistic doctor should understand about it. This Dr. Harris is doing a lot to make his tests available. Yeah, you can have your doctor ordered. You can also, it might be actually less expensive just to order it from a group like our group. But we hope the doctors start using these tests and that they make them available to everyone. Should you supplement with 3,000 milligrams in addition to what you get in your diet? Well, I do. And that's how I came up with the 10 level. It depends what your diet is. what Dr. Harris says is actually test yourself. Say you think you have, you're eating whatever, you're eating your nuts and seeds, maybe you're eating fish. Test yourself, see what it is, and then decide if you want to supplement or alter your diet. Then you go ahead and you measure it 3, 4, 5 months later to see how it's coming along. I'm allergic to shellfish. Is it okay to take omega-3s? Well, this is why we have chose a omega-3 from anchovy, because if you're not allergic to anchovy, you can use this. Is EPA or DHA more important for a cancer patient? I talked to him about cancer, and the EPA and DHA have a little different actions of each of them. And like EPA is very important for cell signaling, reducing inflammation, whatnot. I mean, I think that I would do the mix of both of them, because when you have a standard fish oil, it will come with both of them, or even an algae supplement. I think algae supplement has both of them. You would get the EPA and the DHA, certainly in the fish oils. Is it okay to take omega-3s if you have low platelets? Yeah, what it does is it makes the platelets less sticky, so platelets don't stick to each other. Now, if you have a particular medical problem, as you all know, I'm a nutritionist and I'm actually an anthropologist. I just got fascinated with bone health and autoimmune disease. So any questions like that, feel free to ask your doctor, especially if you have a doctor who understands nutrition. I don't know what your low platelet situation is, whether it's autoimmune or that the body's attacking itself or whatever, but I don't see any problem with it. But then again, you want to check it out with your health professional. I asked Dr. Harris if there are any people that shouldn't use this, and he really says that they're very safe. I bruise easily and I get a headache if I get too much omega-3s. My omega-3 score was 10.2 with just one capsule of 415 total omega-3s and 2 to 3 ounces of fish every day. I wonder if some people have a bleeding tendency that they need to watch how much to take. Well, isn't that interesting? Because you have an omega-3 score of 10.2, which is really very, like the Japanese have, a high level, and with just one capsule of 450 milligrams. Now, yeah, that's pretty unusual. But so we'd say, hey, your level is good. And you eat 2 to 3 ounces of fish every day. So you're getting the omega-3 fats through your combination of diet and supplements. And you wonder if people have a bleeding tendency. Now, so Dr. Harris is saying that the slight thinning of blood, and the increase in bleeding time is actually probably a normalization of the bleeding tendency, and that he thinks that the research doesn't show any indication that that there's going to cause excessive bleeding. What I'm struck in your case is how you've gotten such a high omega-3 index with that little. I mean, the fish you're eating must have a lot of. I don't know if you're living off the coast of Alaska, but you must be getting an omega-3 content from the fish that's quite substantial. That's very good. Okay, great. I think we're going to wrap it up pretty quick. If you take 3,000 milligrams of omega-3, should you stop baby aspirin? Well, years ago, I talked with some officials from the FDA. I was at some meetings speaking to these FDA officials, and they said exactly this baby aspirin thing is to help thin the blood. And they're kind of taking a second look at that because it can cause bleeding of the stomach. They're not suggesting that as much before, but this omega-3 fats is a very good replacement for that. That is a very good replacement. Can omega-3 fats lower cholesterol? I don't know if you heard Dr. Harris. He was mentioning that the early studies he did was on omega-3 with these. They were looking to see would it affect cholesterol, and it did not affect cholesterol, but it did affect triglycerides. And triglycerides are the fat, we call them like the junk food factor from coffee, sugar, alcohol, processed food. You don't want very many of those. You want like a level below 100 of triglycerides, and the omega-3 fats will lower triglycerides. They do not seem to lower cholesterol. Well, this has been quite a marathon. I appreciate all of you who stayed tuned in with us. We're going to make this video available. We want to, in every possible way, see how we can stimulate repair of the body. This is one of the really great nutrients. And the most fun about it is you can actually know your level. We've got an idea what the optimum level is. You can adjust your diet however you want. Vegan and vegetarians have a little greater challenge, but it's very possible. And so you pay attention and you get your body to convert better some of these other nuts and seeds into the omega-3 fats, and you can test for it. It's my pleasure. It's my pleasure to be with you tonight. I hope you enjoyed the video, and we'll be talking to you soon.